Hey classmates, excited to be with everyone here at the end of the semester in week 6 and looking forward to sharing a brief video on the readings this week in place of the memo. So in Bullman and Deal's chapter 18, they focused on change. I found this chapter really interesting. I like to think of myself as a change agent. I always joke my parents prepared my brother and I well for change because we moved a lot growing up, and so I always say we adapt and embrace change a little bit more with a sense of adventure, since that was part of our growing up experience. I really liked the Exhibit 18.1 on reframing organizational change on page 370 in the Bullman and Deal book. The kind of looking at each frame and the barriers to change, and then the strategies using those frames. So I also thought it was interesting that they stated that HR is often an afterthought when it comes to change and preparing people within an organization for change, and that when that isn't done, we see some of the problems with implementing change of people not fully thinking through processes, not being aware of how this affects how people do their jobs and how they feel about their jobs, and that's a challenge to the change process within organizations. So I thought that was really interesting about the human resource frame, helping us understand why people have concern about change and the importance of how change affects us as people. They brought in the structural frame that this really, in regards to change challenges us to think about the ambiguity and just kind of the feelings of confusion and distrust within the organization, and using the political frame that change can contribute to power struggles and conflict, and then the idea of the symbolic frame of, people losing their identity of the organization as they make radical changes. I thought when I was reading that, I thought, kind of like New Coke, and then that was the example. So I thought that was kind of funny. I thought also Exhibit 18.2 on how these how these 4 frames connect to Cotter's 8 stages was also really interesting, and I wrote a little bit about that in my response this week. And so in chapter 19, ethics, I thought this was an interesting chapter as well, and kind of gave a nod to a question one of our classmates, Tony, had about why hasn't ethics come up yet. So I thought we just were a week behind was all. So I thought it was interesting, the whole idea of the soul of the company, and that wasn't something I really thought about, but yet I would identify quickly companies like they used examples like Southwest or Ben & Jerry's or Patagonia that, have this great culture and very friendly to workers, and people choose to use those products because what they stand for. So I would have identified that, but I wouldn't have identified it before reading chapter 19 on soul. So I thought that was really interesting. It made me think about some other work I've done around authentic leadership, and that, a company that has a soul and is living its values, you can expect them, regardless of the challenge, to make the right decision and really kind of be ethical. So I thought that was interesting as well. Chapter 20 I thought was a really nice demonstration, a case study, if you will, of how a leader could use the 4 frames. It brought me some relief, but at the same time caused me some stress when reading the conclusion there in chapter 20, that reframing, like management and leadership, is more art than science, is what Bullman and Deal said. And every artist has a distinctive vision and produces unique work. So kind of these frames, thinking about it and the idea of art, really kind of made this of saying like art is in the eye of the beholder, and that really kind of stood out to me as giving some flexibility in regards to how people use the frames, but then also wanting to be able to have a better guideline on how to use those. So the other thing in the conclusion that stood out to me was the importance of reflection from leaders, and I'm not naturally a very reflective person, so that was kind of, I think, a good reminder for me to read and to learn about. So I just wanted to say thanks for listening to my video, and hope everyone has a great rest of the semester, and looking forward to reading people's posts.